Welcome to CXWise, the podcast where we share wisdom, insights, stories, and expertise from the world of customer experience. I'm your host, Nathan Bennett, and you're about to hear real-world experiences and practical advice that will elevate your CX game, no matter your title, no matter your industry. So without further ado, let's get wise. My guest today is one of the heads that would be on the Mount Rushmore of customer experience. And what a beautiful head it is. Dan Gingiss, welcome, man. How are you?
Oh, hey, I'm always happy to do an interview with someone who uses the same barber as I do, because I know you're good people.
It's nice, right? It's nice. We have a clean, tight look. We're looking very sharp and very shiny off the top of our heads.
We do. And
well, let me embarrass you for a little while, because I'm going to talk about how awesome you are. So you are a keynote speaker. You are the author of 2 books, The Experience Maker, How to Create Remarkable Experiences That Your Customers Can't Wait to Share, and also Winning at Social Customer Care, How Top Brands Create Engaging Experiences on Social Media. You have been leading teams for over 20 years on nearly every marketing channel, from direct mail to email to social media. You have worked for Discover, McDonald's, Humana, and so many others. Your thought leadership in the customer experience space is unrivaled. And one of the things I love about you is not only are you a licensed bartender, not only are you a father of 2, but you are a huge pinball fan. And that to me is probably one of the coolest things I've ever heard. So let me break the ice a little bit. When we're talking about customer experiences, what kind of memorable customer experience did you give to Michael Jordan when you delivered him a pizza? Does Michael Jordan still talk about that experience that he had with you? Does he still tell his friends?
I don't know if he tells his friends, but I certainly still tell my friends. But humorously enough, I think it was a very early customer service experience for me, in the sense that I worked for Domino's. I was in high school. I knew that Michael Jordan was a customer. He called actually quite often to order pizzas. So I did get to deliver one to him, and he opened the door. He was in a white t-shirt and Bulls shorts. He's ginormous. And the thing is, I was told by the other drivers that you could ask for an autograph and he would gladly give you one, but then he wouldn't tip you for the pizza. Or if you didn't ask for an autograph, he was a very generous tipper. Now, I kind of already knew which direction I was going to go, but what sealed it for me was when he opened the door, I noticed that he was looking over my head. He was looking behind me. And I realized this guy doesn't even get privacy when he orders a pizza. And it was that moment that solidified it. I'm like, there is no way I'm asking this guy for an autograph. I'm going to treat him like every other customer. And you know what? He did give me a very generous tip. And so to me, it was all worth it.
That's awesome, man. You made the right choice. And I'm sure he appreciates that even to this day, because you were taking the customer into account. You observed what the customer wanted in that moment, and you were able to adjust maybe your own expectations. So valuable lesson even then. What early customer experience lessons, if any, did you learn from your father when he was running Gingiss Formal Wear? Were there some early indicators of things that you observed that you were like, somehow that's imprinting on me and I'm going to use that for the rest of my life?
First of all, I always remember when I would go to the office with him. He had an office in downtown Chicago, and I don't know how many employees there were, but I guess in my kid head, there were 100 or so there. He had the corner office, but every morning he would get his coffee and he would walk through the entire office and say good morning to everyone.
That's huge.
And I thought that was a really cool thing that the president of the company did. He also was one of the first users of, remember car phones before?
Yeah, I remember my dad had one bolted into the floor of his car. Yeah.
Well, he decided to put them into the delivery trucks that were coming to all of the stores, because what was happening that he noticed was employees didn't know when the trucks were going to arrive. So they'd have to go stand outside and wait for 45 minutes. Meanwhile, the truck's in traffic. And
Oh.
so he was one of the first to install phones into the truck so that they could call ahead and say, hey, we're in traffic, we'll be there at a certain time. That has an impact on employee experience and on customer experience. Is if their employee is sitting outside waiting for a truck, then they're not helping customers.
Man, I mean, he was a technological visionary even back then. And that's a huge expense back then, too. And what a smart way to enhance his employee experience in a way that probably saved him a lot of money in the long run. Brilliant. I think that's incredible that those lessons imprinted upon you, that he kind of knew intuitively. And I have to think that you have that same sort of customer experience eye and gene, because you don't really go to school to major in like customer experience. It's a taste that kind of grows as you have different experiences yourself, as you have different jobs and different career paths.
Yeah, it's interesting that you refer to it as a gene, because I've always wondered about that. I do think a lot of my views on customer experience do come naturally. I didn't learn them in school. And to me, I try to tell people what that means is anybody can do it. You don't need an advanced degree in customer experience to be good at it, but you do sort of have to have a certain way of thinking. And the best way it was described to me was from a boss at Discover. He said, I've watched you in business meetings, and I've noticed that you're always wearing the customer hat. You're always trying to solve business problems through the lens of the customer. And my first thought was, well, doesn't everybody? It's like, no, not everybody does that. But to your point, that just sort of came naturally to me. And I like to give the example of the airline industry, right? So somebody in finance in the airline industry said, we need to make more money. And then somebody raised his hand and said, I got a great idea. Why don't we charge people to check their bags? And then somebody else at the meeting probably said, yeah, but they've been checking their bags for free for 50 years. And then the finance guy goes, exactly. And then next thing we know, we have bag charges, which provide absolutely zero additional value to the customer, but now a cost. And so what do people think about airlines when they do that? It's not positive. Is there a way for airlines to make additional money and still keep customers happy? Absolutely, there is. But it's not just let's find a random charge and see how much we can get people to pay.
Yeah, it's not about sticking your customer with something. It's almost like a fine for bringing things with you. And then what happens when they lose the bag and they have no idea where it is? You're even more incensed. And we've probably all had that unfortunate experience. When I worked in customer experience in a number of different aspects like food and service industry and the hospitality industry, I tended to look at the facility that I was in charge of through my mother's eyes, because we grew up going to restaurants a lot. And I'm not talking about fancy places. I'm talking like Olive Garden on a Sunday afternoon or something. So I do remember my mother having a very keen sense of the experience and the environment and the music and the cleanliness. And when something was a little off, she would mention it, at least to me and my dad at the table. And I always thought like, ugh, why are you being so picky? But now, I used to work for a Starbucks, and it was my job to go into stores that were sort of failing and kind of go in there and figure out why they weren't doing as well as they should. And one of the things that I found out pretty consistently was the customer's experience had been compromised in some way. Like there was a store that wasn't playing music, so it didn't feel right. The coffee wasn't fresh, so it didn't smell right. The coffee bags that are there on display were a little dusty. So little details like that, I think I got from Betty Bennett. So thank you, Mom, for all of your pickiness.
It's funny that you mentioned your mom. So I wrote a blog about my mom. She has this piece of advice that has nothing to do with customer experience, except I turned it into customer experience. Every time I travel somewhere for a speech, she says, be aware of your surroundings. Always, same instruction every time. And I realized that being aware of your surroundings is exactly what your mom was doing.
Yep.
And it is a great mantra for customer experience. Just keep your eyes open and look at things. And no, the coffee bag should not be dusty, nor should the wine glasses. Because if they're dusty, then where my mind goes is what else is dusty? Is the food in the back dusty?
Yeah, if the front of house looks bad, what does the back of house look like?
Exactly. And you don't ever want your customers thinking about that. And that's why I'm a huge believer that the little things matter in a big way in customer experience. In a lot of ways, customer experience is nothing more than a million little things.
Yeah. So on this show, we've talked to a lot of CX influencers, but I always want to start with this. What is your definition of customer experience, and how does it differ from customer service?
Sure. So let me answer the second one first. I think customer service is a subset of customer experience.
Mhm.
There's a terrific quote in my book from a guy named Chris Zane, who is the
Mhm.
owner of a shop called Zane's Bicycles or
Yep.
Zane Cycle. And he says customer service is what happens when customer experience breaks.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant, right? Because if you don't want to have a customer service team, then all you got to do is have a perfect customer experience.
Yep.
No one will ever want to call. Now, we know that's not really possible, but customer service is part of the customer experience. My definition is that customer experience is how customers feel about every single interaction with the brand.
Mhm.
And the feel part is really important because perception is reality. You can have your coders and your programmers say, we got the best, easiest to use mobile app in the world. But if your customers say it's confusing, the answer is it's confusing. And then every single interaction part is really important because, especially in today's business world, we have interactions across many different channels, many different time periods, many different devices in many different places. And each one of those interactions has an opportunity to frame how the customer feels about the business. So every interaction matters.
One of the things I've noticed about how you talk about customer experience is that you have a very human, empathetic approach that some people are lacking. And I think without that, you don't really get customer experience. And with that in mind, I'd love for you to walk us through your wiser methodology, because I think it's imbued with empathy and humanity and really understanding how the human brain works, how human expectations work. And I have to say, this is the CX podcast. For us, WISE stands for wisdom, insights, stories, and expertise. But your wiser methodology stands for what? And then let's unpack that for a little bit.
Sure. So I start with WISE too, and then I add the R at the end because it's sort of a different piece. So the four elements of WISE are witty, immersive, shareable, and extraordinary. And what these are four concepts that help companies create the kinds of experiences that people want to share. And this is all based on some research that shows that consumers actually want to share positive experiences more than negative ones. All you got to do is look at your Instagram feed to see that I'm right about this, right?
Right.
People want to share their best versions of themselves. And when good things happen to them, they want to talk about it. The problem is that 2/3 of consumers can't remember the last time any brand exceeded their expectations.
Mhm.
And so because of that, we don't get as much positive sharing as we would like. Now, what do people not share? They don't share ordinary or average or so-so or meh or mid, whatever generation you're
Mhm.
in and you want to use that word. That's what people don't share. And so WISE are four elements that help you create these kinds of experiences. The R then, which makes it wiser, because we want you to be wiser than the competition, is to be responsive. And that is, of course, what Sprinklr is so great at, is helping companies to be there when customers reach out.
Yeah.
So the WISE piece, it starts with witty. And witty is really the most fun piece of it. It's not about being hysterical, but witty is about being clever, using language to your advantage, and refusing to be boring.
Mhm.
That last one's really important. I believe any industry can have fun, even if you think you are in the most boring industry. And please remember, in my 20 plus year career, 14 of it was in financial services and another 2 was in health insurance. I've been in boring industries. They don't have to be. And I think that's what's really fun. So examples of witty come everywhere in any kind of communication. I take tons and tons of photos of signage
Mhm.
everywhere I go. I love signs because signs are always an opportunity to communicate. And you can change one word in a sign and change the entire meaning of it and make it more memorable and more fun for people.
I 1000% agree with you. Oftentimes, the larger the company, the more they want to be taken seriously. And so they are really hesitant to lean into what you're describing as witty. What would you say to those companies that are like, well, we can't be witty or cheeky or clever? We're a serious company. We do serious
Yeah.
things. What would
We're
you say
making
to them?
people's money. We need to be serious.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No one will respect us if we have a sense of humor, right?
Yes, I get it. So this is why I talk about not having to be humorous. It's really about putting a smile on somebody's face. And we can do that in a lot of different ways. Let me give you an example from financial services that I put under witty, not because it's funny, but because I think it's clever. JP Morgan Chase did something a couple of years ago where on their login page, they were able to use the browser to figure out what zip code you were in. And they showed you a picture in the background that was from your city, but it was intentionally a picture that was a neighborhood picture. So if you were in San Francisco, you're not seeing the Golden Gate Bridge, you're seeing like Chinatown, or you're seeing some area that you know is your neighborhood or is your city, but maybe I don't know it because I live in Chicago. And I thought that was brilliant, right? Because it's a way to connect with customers and to sort of show the humanity of the relationship. And that's enough, at least in my opinion, to be put under the witty banner because it is different from what other banks do. Every other bank has a plain blue website because somebody decided a long time ago that banks need to be blue because it's a power color. And so being witty says, hey, if everybody else is blue, we're going to be something else. We're going to intentionally be different, and that's going to help us stand out.
It's one of those things that really endears people to other people, right? We enjoy it when someone is witty, when somebody is clever, charming. Those things are what make us like other people. So why would brands then shy away from doing the same thing?
I'm just thinking of two other examples of this. One of my favorite signs in the world is on the side of a building in downtown Manhattan, and it says, "We are probably the lowest priced in the city."
Probably.
I love that, right? It's one word, but it
Right.
completely changes the meaning. In San Francisco, there's a coffee company called Phil's Coffee, and there's a sign there with a big smiley face that says, "Hang tight, we'll be right with you." That's so much better than "please wait here,"
Right.
right? It's just a way of talking that is more friendly, more human, and feels more relational.
Right. And it's insightful too.
But you're not falling out of your chair laughing.
Right.
It's not
Right. It's
that.
not hilarious.
Now, if you can be that funny, you
Mhm.
cause all of your customers to fall out of their chair all the time, please do that. But
Right.
that's really, really hard. And again, most brands, that isn't going to be brand right for them. I would 100% agree. A bank should not be funny. You do expect some level of seriousness, but you also expect some level of humanity.
That's really interesting. I was thinking about you and I having grown up in and around Chicago. And I remember those long lines when we were waiting for the roller coasters. I remember as a kid, it was a game changer for me when they put up the TV screens that showed Bugs Bunny
Looney
cartoons. And then, of course, nowadays we have the Harry Potter ride at wherever it is, Universal Studios, taking it like to the next level.
I'm glad you brought up Harry Potter because I don't know if you know this, but the waiting in line part at those Harry Potter lines has become so popular that there is a growing trend of people that are waiting in line with no intention of going on the ride. And the reason is because the waiting in line has become an experience. You get to go through Hogwarts Castle and engage with the characters and all that. And I mean, can you imagine you stand in line for 45 minutes, get to the front and be like, "No, thanks, I don't like roller coasters."
I'm good.
What? But the takeaway for every brand listening to this or watching this is, where in your business do you make people wait? And how can you fill that space and turn it into an experience? So if you're a bank, I don't expect you to walk people through Hogwarts Castle. But when I apply for a credit card or a bank account or whatever, there is a time period between which I apply and between which I receive the card and can actually start using it. That's an opportunity to create an experience for people. Usually it's a missed opportunity. And what happens is, even today, banks think that it's normal to say, well, we'll let you know in 7 to 10 days whether you've been approved. Like, what?
Right.
Like, I can get my Amazon package in 2 hours, but you need 7 to 10 days, business days too.
Stays. Yeah. So let's talk about immersive because that's kind of what we're talking about with the Harry Potter experience.
Yeah, it is
So
a great
yeah,
example of that. So, immersive is when you have an experience that you just sort of feel in your bones, you feel with your whole body. And from a business perspective, the best ways to create immersive experiences are either to go for one of the five senses or more than one of the five senses, or to try to hit on people's emotions. Because when we have an emotional moment, whatever emotion that is, it tends to be more memorable. And so, if we can find something that is emotional or find something that appeals to one or more of the senses, we're going to create a more immersive experience. Another way to think about it is to engage the customer in the experience so that they are a protagonist. They're part of the experience. So, one of my favorite examples here is from a bar that serves a drink called the Old Fashioned Experience. Now, as a customer experience guy, I didn't have to look very far on the menu after I saw the Old Fashioned Experience that I had to try this
you
one
got
out.
to try it. Yep.
So, the Old Fashioned Experience comes as a glass of bourbon and a separate glass that has what looks like a frozen bloody eyeball. But what it really is an ice sphere that has the rest of the ingredients of the old fashioned frozen into it. This ice ball is not solid, it is semi solid. So what happens is the customer gets to pour the bourbon onto the ice ball and watch as the ice ball melts and literally converts the drink into an old fashioned. Now,
Cool.
as this is happening, you can actually smell it because as the ice ball starts to melt, you can smell some of the flavors that get released. If you're like me and you're impatient, you're tasting it along the way. So you're also getting that sensation. But the best part about it is you're involved, you're in control. You're actually making the drink, not the bartender, right?
Yeah.
That's immersive. And that's what makes it so memorable. And what I love about that example is we are talking about a drink that is literally called old fashioned. It is like one of the oldest drinks known to man. And yet they have completely made it new and different.
I love that. Immersion is an incredible aspect that I think we often overlook. So, talk to me about shareable too, because one of the things that I love that you have said about shareable is so many businesses or brands settle for a candle when they could be creating a sparkler moment.
Yeah, shareable is really important because it is sort of the end game, right? We want our customers to be sharing their experiences, but sharing doesn't happen by accident and it doesn't happen just because you ask. In fact, I don't like it when brands say, please follow us on Instagram and don't forget to tag us and use our hashtag and here's our selfie station. It's like too many instructions. And as a friend of mine likes to say, if you have to tell someone it's a selfie place, it probably
It's
isn't.
not a selfie place.
Because selfies are spontaneous, right? So I think that shareable happens when we create experiences that intentionally have a moment where, and we've all had this happen before, nobody tells us to, we just pull out our phones because we got to capture it. And maybe we're sharing it with 1 million followers, that would be great. Or maybe we're just sharing it with mom and dad or with our kids or with our coworkers or a friend. Either way, we're talking about that brand, and that's the shareable piece. One of my favorite examples of shareable comes from when I took my teenage son to Fleming's Steakhouse for his birthday. And when we walked in, the maitre d' handed him a handwritten birthday card that was signed by the staff. But what was funny is while we were having dinner, it was actually my younger daughter who observed something. She said, if they gave Mark a birthday card, I'll bet they're going to do something special for dessert. I'll bet, she said, they're not just going to give him a slice of cake and a candle. Cue the record scratching stop. Because I'm thinking, what's wrong with a slice of cake and a candle, especially when it's free for your birthday? But she was exactly right. What's wrong with it is every restaurant does it. And so it can be shareable, but it's not a guarantee. And a lot of times, as we said before, people don't share ordinary. So out comes for dessert a box of 4 handmade chocolates sitting on a plate with happy birthday spelled out in cocoa powder and a sparkler. Because everybody knows a sparkler's cooler than a candle, right?
Yep.
And no one tells us to do this. All 4 people at the table pull out their phones to take a picture of this dessert. The photo that is in my book you can see the individual sparks of the sparkler, right? It's totally Instagram ready. It's gorgeous. And again, the takeaway for all of you watching or listening that aren't in the restaurant business is to look in your business for where you have a candle. A candle is a fine thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just ordinary, and it's what everybody else does. If we can escalate it to a sparkler, now we're going to stand out from everybody. And a sparkler doesn't cost more. A sparkler is not more operationally complex. A sparkler is just different and therefore better. And so we try to zig when everybody else zags.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do with shareable, because that's the kind of things that people want to talk about.
Well, you're literally describing something that is extraordinary, which brings us to the E that I so desperately wanted to get to, because it's one of those things where you kind of throw up your hands and go, I run a chain of gas stations or convenience stores, or do people really expect extraordinary from me, or do people really expect extraordinary from my brand, no matter what that is? What are customer expectations like, and how do we go about creating an environment where we're setting up for the extraordinary?
Yeah, well, first of all, you make a great point that these things do overlap, right?
Yeah, they
Is
do,
that
yeah.
extraordinary experience is probably going to be shareable as well. And so extraordinary just means a little bit better than ordinary. It doesn't necessarily mean miles above ordinary. And if we assume for a moment that our competitors are ordinary, then we really only need to be a step ahead of them to really stand out. And in terms of expectations, I would answer this two ways. The first is, I do think customer expectations have risen a ton since the pandemic across industries. So customer expectations have never been higher. Secondly, regardless of whether customers expect anything different or special when they go to the gas station, what you need to keep in mind, especially as that gas station owner, is that they have a choice. There is likely another gas station across the street that is exactly the same except for the logo on it. They sell the same product, they sell the same stuff in their convenience store at the same price. And so if you are trying to get people to choose your side of the street over the other side of the street, you got to do something that is above ordinary. And you got to do something that's different. You know, you mentioned samples of coffee at Starbucks. Why can't a gas station do that in their convenience store? Why can't they have little samples of their donuts or whatever it is that's there? It's a tiny thing. It's not expensive. It's not operationally complex. It's just a little bit better than the guy across the street. And that's what makes people come back. Totally fine with me, right? Like, imagine that you've got a gas station customer for life because you gave them a taste of a donut. Like, wouldn't you make that trade 100 times?
Right.
100, right? So yes, customer expectations are very high. And if you are in what feels like a business where everybody's the same, that's where your ears should sort of prick up to say, we got to do something different. Otherwise, we're just going to be looked at as the same as everybody else. And that's harder to draw new business.
All right, let's get to the R, which is responsive. First of all, I want to ask you, why is the R in little parentheses? Why is that like not foundational? Because it seems so essential to creating these experiences.
The reason I put it a little bit separately is I believe that if you use WISE, then these are the instructions for creating experiences that people want to talk about. Now, if you don't do that, people really aren't going to be talking about your brand, at least not positively. And so the R happens because you've done WISE, because you've created these kinds of experiences. Now there's positive conversation, and you want to be part of that conversation. So you want to be responsive. One of the things that I found in corporate America is that brands, even today, often fail to respond to positive comments. They're so busy taking care of the customer service issues that they're ignoring the customer says, man, I love X Airlines. And then the airline doesn't say anything. Like, why? This person just took time out of their day to praise your brand. And the problem, of course, is that in the history of customer service, there's never been another channel where people actually praised you, right? Nobody ever called the toll-free number and said, yeah, I'm just calling to say,
great.
That's never happened. So we never trained our customer service agents to respond to happy people. That's never been a problem. But when you use WISE and you have people talking about you in a positive way, now there becomes this opportunity to talk to happy customers. And you know what makes a customer even happier is when the brand engages with them back, especially in social media, because they just feel good about it. They feel like this brand knows me, they appreciate me, we're friends, we have a relationship, and it makes people feel good. And so that's why responsive is just a little bit off to the side, but you're absolutely right. It is foundational. It's an opportunity for us to have a relationship with our customers. And circling back to what you said before about this customer experience being kind of an innate thing, the way that I look at this, if you really want to just boil it down to the simplest thing ever, without customers, we do not have a business.
Right.
If I don't have customers, I don't have a business, and neither do you, and neither does the gas station. So customers are our single best, most important asset. Period, exclamation point, that's it. And so that's why we have to think through things from the customer perspective, because we want our customers to stay, we want more customers, and we want our customers to tell other people about us.
I want to take this opportunity to really highlight your book, The Experience Maker. What a tremendous work of thought leadership. And I love the little details that you've put into this book, like the light bulb on the cover. You're talking about making things immersive and a little bit different than ordinary. I love it. It's fantastic. I do want to say to our listeners, if you use the hashtag CXWise and post it to social media with a takeaway, whatever meant something to you from this conversation, hashtag it with CXWise, and we will send you a copy of Dan's book, The Experience Maker. You have got to read it and you won't regret it. And let me ask you about a quote in there. You say that each department in an organization owns a different part of the experience, and the departments often don't communicate with each other. Do you think that brands are even aware of that? And then how do they fix that?
Yeah, so you're referring to what a lot of companies will call a siloed organization. And unfortunately, as companies get bigger and bigger, this happens more and more. And what this really gets down to is this question of, do we need a centralized customer experience department, or is customer experience everyone's job? Now, that's a trick question because the answer is yes. We need both of those things, right? Because we need a culture in which every employee understands that customer experience is part of their job description, whether it's written there or not. Even if you never talk to a customer, you're making decisions every day that impact customers. And so you have to be able to look at it through the customer lens. At the same time, we need a department that can look at the entire customer journey from that 40,000-foot view so that we can see the various transitions and handoffs and pain points and other things that we can go into and fix. When you have a siloed organization, one of the things that I always suggest is, let's say that I'm in section 3 of the customer journey and you're in section 5 of the customer journey. We don't really talk to each other because we've got very different jobs. You're on the digital side and I'm in the in-person side. And so never shall the two meet. But what I always suggest is that wherever you are in the journey, understand where the customer was before they came to your portion and understand where they're going next. Now, if you and I do that, then when I'm in charge of section 3, I'm also paying attention to section 4 because I know where the customer's going. Good news for you because you're in section 5 and you're also looking at section 4 because you need to know where the customer is coming from. Now we create some overlaps in our journey so that we're not entirely siloed. We are not like literally just totally separate. We are all bleeding into the before and after piece because that's usually where experiences fall down, is when there's a handoff from one department to another. The classical example of this is, let me transfer you to another department that can help you. And then you get transferred and you got to start your story all over again because they don't know. That's a perfect example of that.
So I think that kind of transitions really, really well to making things easier for those care center agents, giving them the right tools, empowering them to make decisions on their own, because nobody likes to be on hold for a long, long time, right? So what are those things that organizations can do specifically in their call center or care centers that can make their agents' jobs easier? I know one of those things that we talk about a lot of time is time itself. But I'm wondering, what are some things that if you could sit down with a call center supervisor or manager and say, hey, these are the things that could make these employee experiences better, thus making your customer experience better, what might some of those things be?
Well, first of all, listen to your call center employees because they are the
Mm,
ones talking to customers every day. I used to love when I was at Discover going into the call center. You know that recorded message that says calls might be monitored? Well, I
mhm.
was doing some monitoring. I loved that because not only could I hear what the customer was saying, and if you have never heard a real customer service call, then you have to because you get emotion, you get feeling, you understand, when you start to hear the frustration, at least to me, it would make my blood boil. I'd be like, oh
Mm.
man, this customer shouldn't be having this problem with us, right? We got to fix this. But then we'd hang up the call and I'd talk to the agent. I'd say, have you heard this one before? They'd be like, only every day. And it never hit my desk, even though I was usually in charge of fixing it, right? And so I would learn so much just by talking to my agents.
Mm.
Another thing is, I think the call center is a great place for artificial intelligence, not to take the place of agents, but actually to help agents do their job better. I
Right.
always like to imagine an agent sitting next to IBM's Watson,
Mm. Was on Jeopardy.
right?
Yeah.
And think about it, like they're sitting next to a computer that knows the answer to every question ever asked. Think about the confidence that's going to give to an agent, right? And now instead of that clack, 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 or let me pull up 17 different screens and see if I can find it. If the agent already knows that the answer's coming down the pike, then what they can do is focus on the conversation with the customer, the humanity, the relationship, the back and forth. They can listen better. Anybody ever call a contact center and feel like the person wasn't listening to you because they're too busy clack, clack, clacking, looking for an answer? And so I think AI can help a ton on that. And the third thing I would say is what we were mentioning before. Let customer service agents handle some happy customers
Mm.
because think about it, their whole day they're dealing with miserable, angry people. I mean, I always worry about how they're going to go home and treat their significant other.
It's draining. Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about one of the best things a brand can do is hear complaints. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how we respond or how we're responsive to those complaints can make us change our focus?
Yeah, so I always advise people do not be afraid of complaints. Now, I'm not talking about trolls or
Right.
spammers or anything. I'm talking about people with legitimate complaints about you or your business. The thing is that people complain because they care. They actually want you to do better. They want the experience to be improved, and they are giving you a chance to make it so. Now, what's worse is customers that don't complain and they just silently leave. Because now you've lost a customer, usually to your competitor, and you don't even know why. So you can't do it better the next time. So I would much rather have a customer leave, screaming and yelling and giving me all the complaints
Mm.
so that I can take those and say, all right, lost that customer, but what can we do going forward to not lose other customers? At Discover, we always had this data point. I'm not actually sure where it came from, but it was, I guess, an assumption, which was that every time somebody called the call center with a complaint, that there were 100 customers that had the same complaint that didn't call. Think about how powerful that is, right? And so that means we've got to treat every call with unbelievable dedication and importance because it's not just one person calling. It's the one person that decided to give us a chance that's calling. The other 99 are off finding another credit card company. And so we've got to welcome that complaint and then be able to fix it and close the loop back to the customer to tell them that we fixed it.
I love that. Dan, my last question is about social media. I know you're adept at that, and I just want to pick your brain for a little bit. How should brands be using social media to their advantage, not only to increase engagement with their brand, but to provide that next level of customer experience, say on something like TikTok that's fresh and new? How can something like TikTok impact a customer's experience for a brand?
So I am not an expert on TikTok. Let me start with that. My kids are, but I am not. But I would say, generally speaking, a couple things. First of all, social media has two words. Please don't forget either one of them. It is social and it is media. If you try to do one without the other, it doesn't work. So a lot of brands feel like, oh, it's TikTok. That's popular. We should be on TikTok. Let's go start putting videos on TikTok. But if that's all you're doing, you're missing the social aspect, right? And you're not going to succeed. So you have to remember that social media has two parts of it. The other thing I would say is be where your customers are. If your customers aren't on TikTok, don't worry about being on TikTok,
Fair
okay?
point.
Why my speaking business is not on TikTok. I don't believe currently today that there are a whole lot of people hiring speakers on TikTok.
Hmm.
Most of the clients that I work with are on LinkedIn. And so I'm spending way more time on LinkedIn because that's right for my business. When I worked for Humana focuses almost entirely on the senior citizen population. Guess what? It didn't matter that we weren't on Snapchat or even Instagram, but we needed to be on Facebook because we all know grandma and grandpa are on Facebook. And so that was the right channel for Humana to be on. So don't feel like you have to be everywhere, just be where your customers are. And again, this comes back to engagement, relationships, conversations. This is what people want today from brands. And I always joke that I like to blame it on the millennials, even though it's not really blame. We should credit the millennials. This was the first generation because they grew up almost entirely digital that kind of demanded this relationship with brands. When you and I were growing up, we didn't have relationships with brands. I remember writing letters to some brands. That's how old I am. But like, we didn't have a relationship. Now you go onto social media and you can talk with a brand and the brand talks back and you actually feel like there's a relationship there. I think millennials started it. Gen Z absolutely have picked it up. And then Gen Xers like us have said, hey, it's kind of cool to have a relationship with the brand. We like this too. And so that has become the expectation now is if I'm really loyal to a brand, I want them to be loyal back to me. A former boss of mine used to say loyalty goes both ways. And I think that's absolutely true today.
1,000%. Listen, Dan, you have been very generous with your time, with your wisdom, your insights, your stories, and your expertise. The book is The Experience Maker: How to Create Remarkable Experiences That Your Customers Can't Wait to Share. And if, like me, you want more of Dan Gingiss, his podcast, Experience This, all 185 episodes are available wherever you get podcasts. Dan, thank you so much for making us all a little bit CX wiser.
I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.